Hi. I want to talk about what it will take for us to create a more peaceful society. It's going to take a lot more than words like, oh, let's all unite and let's all be compassionate and let's all be loving. We need to see this as a national effort to create the world that actually reflects those things. We will be a violence society until we proactively decide and make the effort to be a peaceful, nonviolent society. And in order for this to happen, we need to take a holistic approach. This has to do with things that are happening on the inside as well as on the outside. You know, the Buddha talked about right thought, right words, right action. This means a lot of us taking responsibility, a lot more emotional discipline and intellectual discipline, even the conversations inside our own heads. How often, if we're honest with ourselves, those conversations are violent about other people, and sometimes, unfortunately, violent and terribly judgmental towards ourselves, which is really just as blasphemous. We lack mercy towards others, and we lack mercy towards ourselves. Everybody's just trying. The vast, vast, vast majority of people really are doing their best, and it's a rough time right now. So we're very quick to point to other people and how they should be doing it better, but it would behoove all of us to do a little more self-modulation, self-monitoring of how we're doing. Where can we be more forgiving? Where can we be more merciful? Where we can be less judgmental? It's one thing to have standards. It's another thing to be on your high horse that you're better than other people or whatever it is. Because those energies, those thoughts turn into words, turn into actions. And unfortunately, because of the immense power of the internet, the words that we write, for instance, on social media, have tremendous influence on the lives of people who are reading. A lot of the hatred that we see is cultivated there. And I don't think either side of the political spectrum should be too self-congratulatory right now, because some of the nastiness and the mean-spiritedness is exhibited on both sides of the political aisle. So when we start talking about, no, we're nice, they're hateful, that's just ridiculous. And that's not the kind of new political disposition that is going to lead us through this time. Now, we also have to take responsibility for the fact, as I said, that we have this violent society. The president just renamed the Department of Defense Department of War. But just as we have a Department of War, we should also have a Department of Peace. Now, I think a lot of people are not aware that peace building, both domestically and in terms of foreign relations, is a real thing. And there are 4 factors which statistically indicate that there will be greater peace, whether it's in a neighborhood, in a U.S. city, or some other corner of the world. And those 4 factors are greater economic opportunities for women, greater educational opportunities for children, a diminishment of violence towards women, and an amelioration of unnecessary human suffering. So that's the kind of thing that you think about in terms of political policies. As long as we're going to have a society in which profit making for huge corporations is our societal bottom line, which is what neoliberal politics is on both left and right, then you will have a society which undertends to the cultivation of community, which undertends to the cultivation of the things which actually make people belong. Because what it does is exactly what it has done in the United States over the last few decades, which is to create this kind of dog-eat-dog world where everybody's grasping to get there, as people hardly even have any time and bandwidth to show up for life in the ways, particularly with our children, that create the greatest sense of community and belonging and deep relationship. Now, this business of how we raise our children, this obviously has societal implications, to put it mildly. And this also is not just about how we individually treat our children, but also many of the policies that have to do with world-class education, that have to do with world-class culture, that have to do with world-class health benefits, that have to do with world-class food. If we paid far more attention to our children, we would have a different country, and we would have a different country kind of quickly. Now, there's one issue about children and about raising our children that I want to raise that I think is something we all need to look at. So let's talk about guns for a moment. Second Amendment, I get it. we don't want to go messing with the Bill of Rights. I get it's also value. I get, I was raised to believe that the Second Amendment was important because the government are not the only people who can have guns. I get that. I'm also someone who thinks that it is appropriate to have some regulations of guns. We have, you're free to drive a car, but there are also traffic laws. But that's not even the aspect that I want to talk about so much right now. One of the things that I've noticed a lot in these articles and pictures of Tyler Robinson, who is the alleged, suspected, remember, all innocent until proven guilty in this country, assassin of Charlie Kirk. You see pictures of how when he was a little boy, he had guns. This is a very important issue for us to discuss. And obviously, we know that this issue of young, particularly white men who form a demographic obviously in crisis, a demographic out of which so much of these school shootings, these mass shootings, et cetera, have emerged. Let's be very clear here. If you are a gun-owning family, which I respect, it is legal, that you have guns in your home, they're legally purchased and so forth, I beg you to consider that the prefrontal cortex of the human brain is not fully developed till the mid-20s. A lot of these men who have committed these heinous acts are under that. The prefrontal cortex is so important because it has to do with moral judgments. So if you have a child and you might have the best of intentions and you are trying to teach that child mercy and compassion and goodness and righteousness, but at the same time, and this applies not only to the guns, but it also applies to these violent video games. The brain doesn't know how to handle that. Even in indigenous cultures where, young boys were taught to go out and, use the spear to get the buffalo that was needed. There was an almost sacred quality to it because it was a natural quality. But just having young kids holding up their guns, this is like a good thing without the brain developing in such a way that it has an opportunity to recognize this is real. These are real people's lives here. A young kid that doesn't register it. And the prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the mid-20s. All of us need to be more responsible. All of us need to be more responsible in the things that we think and the things that we say and the things that we do and the things that we write. And none of us are perfect, but we can atone for where we've gotten it wrong. And in terms of the United States, we have to atone. We have to atone for the militarism, for the unbelievable violence that's been perpetrated in other countries that was unnecessary. The violence has been allowed to fester in neighborhoods, the suffering out of which that violence emerged. We're responsible for all this. We as Americans are responsible for all this. And so now it's not just a matter of what we're against. I'm against them. I think they're the source of the problem. That's not going to fix anything. What are we creating? It's not just what are we against. We can't just be against political violence. We have to be for the proactive creation of a peaceful society. And that means each and every one of us has to ask, how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? And that doesn't mean you don't passionately disagree. That doesn't mean you don't have the capacity to say no. But the personal demonization and certainly the personal violence, it starts here. It starts here. We have to connect our heads to our hearts in a way without which we're barbaric. And there's a modern barbarism in the world today. So I hope all of us will take a greater sense of responsibility. That's what citizenship is. That's what real patriotism is. And there's very little that occurs in our lives that does not give us an opportunity to be a better version of ourselves. And a better version of ourselves is, by definition, a more peaceful version of ourselves and a more loving version of ourselves and a more creative version of ourselves as we together seek to create a more beautiful world.